Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my gradual work through of Napoleon in Europe. So those of you who've seen my last video will see that I'm still playing to the same map, but I have made a few additions. So effectively I have left the results of the previous turn where Napoleon began his epic Italian campaign. But what I've done is simply to add in the bits that are relative to the that are relevant, to the standard rules. So what does this involve? Basically, a couple of units have changed. So if I can borrow this gentleman from the British Army here. So in the standard rules, elite infantry are included in the lineup of all the participants' armies, and a couple of them, well, the Austrians and the French, also have heavy cavalry units. They don't have these in all their armies because they're a bit of an elite, but I have added a heavy cavalry unit to that Austrian army, and Napoleon's army has swapped out its original standard cavalry for a heavy. The other thing you'll notice is that fleets are now here. So each of these little counters represents a squadron of ships. The British have been quick to establish their blockade. I'll just shuffle the camera down a bit so you can see the Gulf of Marseille is also covered. So the Royal Navy is very keen to ensure that the various components of the French Navy don't get a chance to meet up. That's the one thing the British don't want, unless it's on their terms and they can force an action that basically wipes out the French fleet. But, I won't think too many dreamy thoughts of Trafalgar because after all, it still is only the spring of 1796, so we're not going to get ahead of ourselves. The other new thing you might notice is these territorial control markers here. So the standard rules introduce a much more clearly defined political aspect to the game, where simple occupation of territory is no longer sufficient. So even though Napoleon's army of Italy is now sitting on that piece of land, it is still administratively Austrian. The only thing is the Austrians obviously can't benefit from the territory's value because it's occupied by the French. But equally, if the French want to benefit from it, they're going to have to take what's called a political action in order to change the allegiance of that territory. So political actions brings me nicely to some changes in the display board as well. So you'll notice some difference from the board we looked at with the basic rules. There is now a production track. So the cards are superseded in the standard rules, and everything's down to how much territory you control and what the economic value of that territory is. So France is very slightly ahead with a rating of 32. The British have 28 and the Austrians have 24. These counters up here represent the existing stock of political action points. So what can you do with these things? Well, political actions are really useful. As you can see from the chart here, you can make a diplomatic overture to another nation if you've got two. The French could potentially use this to try and persuade the Austrians that they no longer want to be allied to the Brits, but obviously they're not going to do that this turn. Annexing a region, you can do that to a minor nation if you happen to occupy it, as long as it doesn't already belong to a major power. If you want to convert something that belongs to a major power, you have to defeat that major power first. But you can do other nasty stuff like cause uprisings, liberate a region, declare an armistice if you and your enemies agree, or declare war. Now, because I'm keeping the scenario that we had previously, there won't really be any declarations of war unless something very, very strange happens. And of course, you can top up your political action points through various means. You get one every production round anyway, winning a major battle or winning a war, or you can just purchase them outright with your production points, but 10 is quite expensive. And the last element, other than the dates, is the diplomatic track. So France, as we can see, is at war with both Austria and Great Britain. She has no allies. Britain and Austria are allied to each other, and both are at war with France. It's just a very handy visual means of keeping track of who's fighting who and who is friends with who, because there are some scenarios where that can change pretty rapidly. So, back to the war. Now, we keep the turn order of the original scenario, so it's Britain and Austria first, followed by France. And because it's the second turn of the scenario, the Brits have regained their mobility, and so have the Austrians. And now the question is, what exactly do both of them want to do? They do want to cause trouble for the French. Sorry, I paused while my brain was buffering. And they're not likely to want to use their political action points for other things. So the British are tempted to cash their political action point in order to trigger an uprising. And they would like to trigger this uprising in the Vendée. Now, usually you can't trigger an uprising within an enemy's home spaces, but there are three exceptions. If Russia is in the game, the Don Basin is one of them. For France, it's the ever troublesome Vendée, and for the British, it's Ireland. So, at the risk of encouraging the French player to do the same thing, the British are going to trigger the revolt in the Vendée. Sorry, bear with me while I struggle to find an uprising counter. So a territory that is in a state of uprising cannot contribute economically to its parent nation. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it doesn't want to, really. So here we go. Bit peasants and pitchforks, but you get the idea. So the Vendée is now in a state of uprising. The Brits are hoping that that was a good expenditure of their political action point. But it does mean the French now have a problem. If they want to get the Vendée back on side, they need to send a certain number of troops there in order to occupy it. And they make a roll at the end of the turn to see whether they've been able to put the insurrection down. But of course, the French have a bit of a problem in that because they're so heavily engaged everywhere else on the map, the Vendée is probably going to have to keep for now. The other problem they have is that if the British make an amphibious landing in the Vendée, the usual penalties and the appearance of a French militia simply will not happen. So the Brits have actually made a very smart move there. Now, as for British movement, they're still in the same strategic quandary they were in last time. And aside from the fact that one of their troops is now a big burly elite infantry. Oh, sorry, I don't know what's going on with my camera. It's trying very hard to focus. Let's see if I can help it. There we go. Is that working? Hopefully that's working. Yeah, so, oh no, it's gone a bit wonky. Sorry, folks. I'm not totally sure what's doing that, but I will carry on and hope for the best. Maybe a bit more light will help. So the British, in terms of military action, are not yet quite ready to commit themselves. They're still very concerned about Hanover, but until they know what the French Navy is up to, they don't really want to risk diluting the strength of the home country. But what they will do, because this is a very obvious move, as you can see, these two naval squadrons are in the Channel ports, and at the moment the Brits have nothing in the English Channel. They're going to do something about that. They're going to dispatch both those squadrons to essentially ensure that the French squadron here in Brittany stays locked up. Brittany is quite a strategic port because the anchor logo overlaps the Bay of Biscay and the North Atlantic, and also, oh no, it doesn't overlap the English Channel, but they don't really want to give the French a freebie. So yeah, so they basically want to ensure that nothing goes on, and if either of those squadrons should break out, the group in the Channel effectively stops them from linking up. Or so the British hope, at any rate. So the British won't commit to any moves, so they've not started any battles. They're going to leave it to the Austrians and see what their allies do. The Austrians are quite encouraged by the British example, and they too want to cause the French trouble. So they're going to also cash in their political activation point and cause more trouble for the French. And they're going to achieve this by putting Belgium in a state of uprising. So obviously the rhetoric of the revolution is not not having much joy at the moment. But as for other things, the Austrians are a tiny bit nervous because they've suffered a setback here. And they recognize that clearly someone down there knows what he's doing, but they don't really want to go on the offensive. And for similar reasons to the French Directory last turn, they're not yet ready to chance everything against the deadlock over here. I mean, it is too risky. If they lose badly, the French have basically free run through a big part of the German state. So they and of course a route into Denmark and direct access to Prussia, not to mention the Austrian Empire and all sorts of scary things that the coalition really doesn't want to see. So they are going to hold the line, but the question remains what to do with these guys. And the very obvious answer, I think, well, there's two obvious answers. One is sacrifice these guys a bit to buy time while reinforcing Vienna, or just send them down there and hope that they'll make a difference. Now, in a way, the speed of their movement is a limiting factor because aside from the cavalry, every unit there can only move one space. So what they are going to do is they're all going to head for Vienna. The Austrians are going to take a chance that nothing bad is going to happen up there. And they'll bring the Hungarian forces in to guard the capital as well. And what they might do is actually send the cavalry to the Tyrol. It's not much by way of a reinforcement, but it puts them in a position to support either of those two armies. So it's a start. But like the British, the Austrians are going to be a bit cautious and wait and see, which leaves things to the French. So the French, encouraged by the way things have been going the previous turn, have decided that they're going to go all in this turn. So they're going to launch offensives on multiple fronts. They're going to go on the offensive, both armies in the north, and Napoleon is going to push further into Italy in the south. Everyone's going to go for it. So we're going to see quite a few major battles this turn. Well, 3. At the same time, the French do want to cause mischief with their naval squadrons, but at the moment they can't really see any sensible way of doing it, not without building up their strength a bit. If they make a foray out of their blockaded ports, they're essentially offering themselves up to the Royal Navy. And they have a slight chance of winning or getting past, but it is a slight one. And if I were doing forward planning, I wouldn't really like those odds. But what they will do, just to get back at the British, and this may be a bit short-sighted. Actually, do they want to get? Yes, they do want to get back at their hereditary enemy. They are going to play their political action point, and the Irish are going to decide that they're really not quite happy with British rule after all. So, so Ireland is in a state of revolt. So it is kicking off everywhere, unfortunately for all concerned. So, with these major battles, let's start in the north and move southwards. And I'm going to borrow the Balkans again, as I've done before. Only this time, we get to use the battle board that comes with this game. So unlike the basic game battles, where it's effectively just a front rank and a second rank, here each army has a sort of deployment area, a middle ground, that's the enemy's deployment area. Each army has a reserve, and they also have a retreat box for units that are driven away in combat. Now, if you're having a battle with 6 or more units aside, it's a major battle, and you have a center, a left, and a right flank. If it was less than 6 units aside, it would be again considered a skirmish, and that would be treated as a single band. So let me just gather my troops. Okay. So as previously, a screen would be placed across the middle if it were a 2-player game, and both sides would assemble their forces in secret. So I'm going to set up the Austrians first, only because they're on the receiving end. So they know the French are coming, and they know it's an army that's roughly equivalent strength to theirs. So they're going to put their artillery in the center with some cavalry and their elite infantry. And let's have infantry on the flanks. So that's fairly balanced. Now, the French are going to take an equally conventional approach. Napoleon's not here after all, so it's going to be, bog standard general versus bog standard general. So in effect, their deployment will mirror that of the Austrians. Now, unlike the basic game, in the standard game, the attacker goes first. The same sort of victory conditions apply, or I should say similar victory conditions apply. If it's a skirmish, if you have no one in the front rank, then you have lost the battle. In a major battle like this, if your center or either of your flanks collapse, then it is a loss. So that's something both sides have to be very aware of. You can't just ignore your flanks. There is a great temptation very often to just mass everyone on one wing or in the center and try and smash through. But if you do that, you have to make sure your other sectors hold, otherwise it could get messy. In terms of maneuvering, units cannot move diagonally. They're committed to moving forward. They can maneuver sideways to reinforce other sectors, but combat is always forward-facing. Battles in the standard game go in a slightly different, quite a different order. Cavalry for the attacker go first, then for the defender, followed by artillery, and then infantry, and then leaders. So there is no leader phase in this battle because neither side has a leader present. So let's start with the cavalry. The French are going to... How aggressive are they feeling? They are going to move their cavalry forward. Now that has both advantages and disadvantages. The presence of the French cavalry there prevents the Austrian artillery from firing at long range, but unfortunately it does the same to the French artillery. However, if the Austrians were tempted to charge them, the cavalry could screen the rest of the formation. Now, of course, the Austrians can't charge yet because they're a bit out of range, but the French are sticking their toe in. So I'm just going to need my help sheet now. Because as you can see, battles in the standard rules involve a whole load of help sheets, so you don't have to memorize what's in the rule book. It becomes a tiny bit more complicated. Now, the French cavalry could, if they wanted to, because they have two battle actions, it's used its movement for one of them. It could attempt to charge one of the Austrian units if it wanted to. The only one it's not allowed to charge is the artillery because of the presence of covering infantry and cavalry. The French decide they will charge, and they're going to charge their opposite number. So they're going to go straight for the Austrian cavalry, see if they can get a bit of battlefield superiority going in this crucial arm. So the way charge combat works is it's 2 dice versus 2 dice. Now, normally cavalry can avoid a charge, but only if it's by infantry, not by other cavalry. So the Austrians have no choice but to meet that one. The first thing you do is check to see whether there's a bonus involved. In this case, it's +0 for cavalry on cavalry. The Austrians get a +1 bonus because they've got combined arms. The French do not. And there is no other relevant one. So let's see what happens. I will use the red dice for the Austrians and white for the French. Oops. Okay, so the Austrians win, and with the +1, they have defeated the French cavalry by a factor of 2. So looking at the charge results, the French lost by 2, so they retreat. So that was rather abortive. But they're not necessarily eliminated. They've just gone into the retreat box. Of course, if the French army loses, then they will be a ripe target for Austrian fire because, again, there's no leader to rally them. So over to the Austrians. They've started off well by pushing back a probe by the French cavalry, and they've effectively taken the French cavalry out of the field. Now that the French cavalry have gone, the Austrian cavalry is going to try and repeat the feat. So they're going to move for 1, and they're going to charge the French elite infantry. Now, at this point, the French elite infantry have the option of forming square in reaction. I tend to lie them down just to indicate that they formed square. I mean, it would be nice if you had more models or a little square, but I don't. So the game rules say you can turn them sideways or turn them backwards, but that looks even weirder to me. So anyway, the French elite infantry have reacted by forming square. And the Austrian cavalry now has a choice. They can either cancel their charge or they can press it home. They decide they're going to press it home, even though they're going to be fighting at a bit of a disadvantage. So I'm going to do the same type of dice roll, white for the French, red for the Austrians. Ooh, okay. And sorry, I should have summed them in the previous action rather than just taking the highest number, but I don't think it made a huge difference. So the Austrians have got a basic score of 8 and the French have 12. Ouch. So the cavalry charging infantry do not get a cavalry charging infantry normally get a +2 bonus. So that would bring them up to 10. They don't have combined arms anymore. And they do suffer a -3 because they're charging squared infantry. So their final total is 7. The French got 12. So even before we even think about the modifiers, they have beaten the Austrian cavalry by 3, or well, more than 3, which means that the poor Austrians are eliminated. So they're completely out of the battle. So the cavalry have basically got rid of each other. Now we go back to the French for the artillery phase, or and the French decide that some long-range fire is needed in the hopes of breaking the Austrian line. Now they're not going to bother targeting the Austrian artillery. They're going to go for the infantry instead, because they really want to knock holes in that. So they are going to, I'm just going to consult the chart. So it's artillery targeting artillery. No, I lied. They're targeting infantry. What am I saying? But they're targeting them at a range of 2, so it's long range. So the target number they need to roll, you see where this is different from charge combat, where it's comparative dice rolls. Here, the French actually have to hit a target number, so it's 9 or greater. They don't benefit from any of these modifiers because the Austrian infantry is still in line, so they're just going to fire and hope they get a 9. And they do. They hit them square on, so the French artillery is clearly at the top of its game. So we now roll on the hit result. On a 1 to 3, the Austrian infantry are eliminated. On a 4 to 6, they retreat. And they have rolled a 1, which is rather catastrophic. So the courageous Austrian Imperial Guard stand their ground and pay an incredibly bloody price for it. And it now means that that artillery is over there on its own. But they are going to take revenge, and they're going to take revenge rather bloodily, because thanks to the Austrian cavalry charge, the French Imperial Guard, or actually no, they're not Imperial Guard yet, are they? It's 1796. What the heck am I talking about? Call them Republican Guard for want of anything better, or just an elite unit. So the Austrians are going to fire, and they need much the same as the French did, a 9 or better, but they are targeting a unit in square, which means they get a +2 to their roll. And they got a 9, so that's an 11, so they do hit the French. However, the French managed to roll a 4 on their save, so they are not eliminated, but they are forced to retreat. The cannonade is just a bit too much, so they've gone into the retreat box. The French are rather hoping at this point that they don't lose the battle. So we now go to the infantry. And the French have a bit of a choice, because things in the centre have degenerated into a bit of a stalemate. So they could potentially push an infantry attack through, which might clear the Austrians out. But equally, they might do just as well to hammer the Austrians on the flank and see what happens. It's a bit of a tough choice because infantry have only one battle action, so they can move or fire or charge, but they can't do any combination of them, so it's going to be a tricky one. The French decide that they are just going to go for it and hope for the best, so drums beat and the troops advance. And now it goes to the Austrians. The Austrians are feeling a bit brave. They could, if they wanted to, stand off and just pelt the French with musket fire. But they've decided that they are going to go for a charge all the way down the line. They want to settle this battle right now, and they want a decisive result. So each unit is going to pair off against its opposite number, and there's going to be a series of bloody bayonet actions as the Austrians advance to meet the French. So moving from left to right across the battlefield. And it's red for Austrians, white for French. So we've got 6 on 5. None of these apply, so it's just a straight fight. So the first one, the Austrians won by 1, so the French retreat. What about the second lot? Ah, it was even. Wonder what happens if you get a tie. Oh, nobody, if it's a tie, nothing happens. I do recall that from the rule book. So the Austrians and French basically bounce off each other. How about this lot here? Ooh, the Austrians did well there. So that French unit is eliminated outright. Ah, and in a weird mirror image, the French at the far end actually managed to soundly defeat their Austrian opponents. So overall, the Austrians have got the better of the first round, but the battle is not over. And so now that we've run through everything, there are no leaders again in this battle, so we'll cycle back to cavalry. The French cavalry is out of action, so it's going to immediately go down to the artillery, who look like they're going to be locked in a duel. Now, unfortunately, I've just realized I have another commitment. This is bad planning on my time. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave you all on a bit of a cliffhanger. But I will return and I will record another video as soon as I can get back to the dining table. So I will leave everything as it is. We will fight this battle out, and I shall, if time permits, also fight out the other 2 battles that we've got coming up, because I really want to see what the strategic situation is going to be at the end of the French advance, strategic advance, that is. So let's leave this as it is for now. Both sides are pretty desperate, I would say. The Austrians do have an edge in manpower. It's 3-2 in infantry, and their artillery is sort of evenly matched. So it really is going to come down to whoever manages to win that little push. Because if the French can clear off the Austrian artillery, or if that chap over there can push those Austrians off their position, then the French will win. But equally, if the French get broken on any wing and their entire line is looking really fragile now, then it could be all over for them. And the northern axis of the French advance will basically have turned into a bit of a disaster. So we shall see what happens in the next video. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and thank you so much for putting up with my rather burbly explanations of how this game is supposed to work. As always, I do appreciate your company, and questions, comments, anything you'd like to offer, please do put them down and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But in any case, it's been great fun. It certainly has been for me, and I hope it's been for you too. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Take care. Bye.